the Learn to Discern Spring 2021 webinar series. So today we're going to be talking about the fact that, or is it a fact, does social media make you stupid? So please mute your microphone and turn your camera off, and we are ready to get going.
Thanks, Angie. I do see a couple folks with their cameras on. If you're not sure how to turn it off, if you just kind of wiggle your mouse over the Teams window, you should see a camera icon at the top. If you click it, you should get a slash through it, and that will turn your camera off. All right, so we're ready to get started. Let's introduce your presenters. My name is Allegra Davis Hanna. I teach English for the TC Connect campus, and I'm the department chair for English and Humanities.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Cox. I'm an instructor of government at Connect campus.
I'm Misty Wilson-Mertens. I'm the department chair of social sciences, and my picture's up here, but I'm just running the text today. So I think that's actually supposed to be Professor Thurman up there.
That's okay. I'm Angela Thurman, and I am an economics instructor at Connect, and I'm the department chair for economics and natural sciences. So we're really excited to be wrapping up our spring webinar series with today's presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. And toward the end of the presentation, there will be the attendance link posted in the chat. So without further ado, let's get going.
All right.
Yeah, okay. So I'm just looking at this. We've been talking about social media all semester, but this is a pretty impressive chart. So explain this to us.
Yeah, when I was starting to do research on this particular part of the webinar, I wanted to look at the data and see, okay, how big of an issue is this potentially, or is it? And I thought a good place to start would be here. So Pew Research, they have up-to-date information. They actually have a page on social media. It's called their social media fact sheet. And so this is where I got this information from. And they've been tracking social media usage since 2005. So it's one of the longer studies I did find with consistent data. So I think a good starting point also is to remember that most social media platforms are no more than 10 years old. So this is a good range for that study. The results they published were actually on April 7th, 2021. And if you look at I only picked the chart, not the data share embed piece, obviously, but if you look at all of it, it shows a large increase in usage across the board. So today, around 7 in 10 Americans use social media to connect with one another, engage in news content, share information, entertain themselves. Whereas back in 2005, you can kind of see that progression. You're looking 2005 about 5%, 2011 we get to about 50%, and then 2021 72%. That's a huge jump.
That is a huge jump. Now, is this in all age groups, or does it vary according to the ages?
It's going to vary, and I think that one of the things to think about is that, you know, as we look at social media, early adopters of it are going to be youth, but what the data points to is that at this point in time, even all age ranges. I mean, it really was interesting to see, you know, older people, you know, middle-aged people, youth are all using it about the same. I would say it's more in the youth category, still a little bit higher, but you've seen a significant increase in adults as well. So, you know, you look at again, the numbers there, 5% of American adults used at least one of these platforms. Now 72% do.
Wow, yeah, that is really a ginormous increase in you know, going from, and 5% doesn't even sound that much.
No.
But when we look at the latest census results, we're talking about millions and millions of people.
Yes.
Right?
And I mean, this one focused on American adults, not worldwide. And we kind of talked a little bit in some of the previous, you know, iterations of this is not only an American phenomenon, it is a worldwide phenomenon. So I think that is just mind-boggling to me.
Very interesting. Okay. So
yeah, who is using social media was the next piece I looked at. You can see on the graphs there I picked age and education, and the reason I did those is they were the largest differences or gaps in data. If you look at race, gender, income, those lines are fairly close to one another, whereas you see these are spread out. So Pew basically said that as more Americans have adopted social media, the social media user base has grown to be a more representative group of the broader population. And I think that the increase will only continue to grow as tech becomes a more relevant part of our home life, our work life, everything. The education side was interesting to me, as throughout the graph, the climb by all groups takes a similar rapid trajectory. I can't say that word. Oh, sorry, upwards. And it mirrors the first graph. You see this huge kind of curve up. I wonder though, as looking at these, it looks like it's kind of, I guess, leveling off. And I'm curious, and I don't know the answer, and the data in the at the site didn't tell me, is will it continue to level off or will it increase at some point where you have beyond 75%?
yeah, I noticed that too. It does look like it's sort of maybe reach critical mass, but I do
Yeah.
find it interesting in the first graph, you still see the older age group. They are really on the rise here,
Yeah.
whereas you see the younger age group is the one that's dropping off. And then if you go over to the education one, it looks like the college graduates, that one is sort of tapering off. Whereas, well, they all kind of look like they are, but they're sort of
Yeah.
converging. So
It,
yeah, that would be interesting to know if that is just sort of critical mass or if people are maybe thinking twice about it.
Yeah, and the race, gender, and income, which are not shown on this slide, are doing the similar thing. They're kind of merging together here at this point. And again, the research that they had on Pew did not indicate where it was going. They just kind of said the same thing I did, that tech's not going away. So, it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next, I think, 5 to 10 years.
Very interesting.
So the next part that I looked at was the research on how often we're using various types of social media, kind of digging into, are we looking at Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, etc. So in this graph, Pew said that for many users, social media is a part of their daily routine. And again, they said 7 in 10 Facebook users and around 6 in 10 Instagram and Snapchat users visit the sites at least once a day. I'm going to guess it's more, but they said at least. That was kind of the clarifier. And I was like, okay, at least, does that mean they didn't really give you, I guess, how often did they visit, 10 times on average? It was just at least once a day. But you can see the number for Facebook users is pretty high. And, again, I think that it just shows that there's a diversity of what people are looking at as well online. Um, Another thing to kind of add to this is that YouTube and Facebook seem to be the most widely used online platforms, and their user bases are also the most broadly representative of the population as a whole. I mean, you get youth, you get older adults on both Facebook and YouTube. When I looked at Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram, and LinkedIn more closely, those were not broadly shared. You got a smaller group of people that were using those, and you didn't see a wide range of people like you do on YouTube and Facebook. The other thing that was interesting about the study, there's an April 7th report attached to the Pew Research main media social media fact sheet, and it said that it was kind of interesting. They said that many seem to be concerned about controversies like privacy, misinformation, negative impacts on your health and well-being. But regardless of all that, it's remained pretty stable. The usage has remained stable over the past 5 years. And my question is will this be looking at will this be an issue moving forward? They actually answered that question in this April 7th report. They said that a plurality of experts think sweeping societal change will make life worse for most people as greater inequality, rise in authoritarianism, and rampant misinformation take hold in the wake of COVID-19 outbreaks. But still, a portion believe life will be better in a tele-everything world where we use these as tools properly for workplace, healthcare, and social activity. So there's kind of a good and a bad to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and some recent things that have come up, just I think it was last week, Apple released their new privacy policy where now it used to be where you had to opt out of sharing information, and now you have to opt in. And I know Facebook was really came out strong against that, saying that that was going to hurt advertisers and so on and so forth. But I thought that that was a step in the right direction. And then the people, if anyone is listening from my class, I might put a link in here. There was a recent TED Talk, and they were talking about the fact that the average person does think that things are going to get worse. But in fact, if you look at the facts, overall, like poverty and disease and death from natural causes and death from, natural disasters, all of those metrics have been increasing. So we are actually doing better. We're healthier. We're wealthier. So I think it's really interesting the way social media seems to really push this divide. I mean, what do you think about that?
I do think it does. I mean, because it's the idea of we are kind of drawn to the train wreck. I hate to say it, or the shiny object, and I think that if we're looking on social media, a lot of times what we see, or if we're looking at the news, a lot of what we can see is very negative. So we tend to get into that negative thought process or bubble, and I think that can be deceiving. And the TED talk you mentioned with Hans Rosling was a son, right? Yeah, Ola, is a great one to show that we tend to think negatively when actually the data shows something different. And in fact, I know if you the other talks that we did, the one of the last two we did, there's a real big push, which I think is positive worldwide, to kind of hold these companies accountable. And as they have to be accountable in Europe and Australia and Japan, et cetera, and as states like California, which is kind of leading the way here in the US, put in place more checks and balances on companies and what they can do, I think it'll just continue to improve personally. But that's just my opinion.
All right, that's good to know. So,
Yeah, and this is a Tech Jury article. I wanted to kind of dig in even further, seeing how much time we spend. Because again, some of them are like, oh, they visit one time. Well, if you visit your site one time or the social media site one time, how long are you on there? So this was interesting to get kind of down to the nitty gritty. And again, I would guess that some people are spending more time than what's listed here. This was the average. I love the second one. 50.1% of the time spent on mobile was done using social media apps in 2020. That's a lot. So our mobile phones are a big driver of this, I think. There was also a Kansas study, a University of Kansas study that I looked at. It was interesting. They took a little bit different take on social media and how the specific time was used. And they said that basically that they took those people who took a social media diet increased their time spent working on childcare and cleaning and browsing the internet. So they were still on the internet. They just weren't on social media if they were taking the social media diet. And my question, which the study didn't answer, was, uh, you know, it looks like the participants switched activities that weren't fun, but they were more utilitarian in use. And I wonder if we're using it as a distraction from doing other things. And why did we not use that time off from social media to do more fun activities, to invest in ourselves in a way that wasn't just cleaning the house or doing work? And again, it's such a new area that these questions weren't really answered, but it was something that I liked and kind of dug into. I think that the University of Kansas study showed that also too that there was some negative impact for those who were allowed to spend a lot of time on social media, mainly in the that people indicated that they didn't enjoy their time. They weren't happy when they were doing it. So that was another interesting factor.
that is interesting. All right, so tell us about the pigeon study and how pigeons relate to humans here.
Yeah, this is B.F. Skinner. He is kind of the godfather of behavioral study, and it kind of talking about why time and I spent a lot of time just going through the time and what we spend on social media. Why that's a factor is it can be habit forming. They found, and that goes all the way back. The modern science and data on behavior studies and psychology in this area, everything I looked at relates back to B.F. Skinner. So here he's using a test with pigeons. He also did some tests with rats, if you ever check his stuff out. But he's testing them to send this ball back and forth to each other. And this was aired on CBS in 1959. You can actually go look at some of the old footage on it. It's fascinating. But what he's doing is he's testing a variable reward schedule or systems of payoff to train the animals to perform acts. And he said the big key is randomness. You want to make it random. You're not sure when that reward's coming, but you think it's coming. And he saw that free will was an illusion, as this is his take on it, and that actions could be reinforced by good or bad consequences. And he even invented a machine for better learning, which they go over in the article, the CBS show. Um, and then also one thing I thought that was really fascinating is he mentions casinos and gambling as example of how this could be used on humans. And so when I was reading through B.F. Skinner's stuff and all the data on behavior psychology is if we use social media, are we becoming the pigeons? Is social media set up to be habit forming? And it is, are they designed in a way that is drawing us in, and can that be negative or can it be positive?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And if you think about it, aren't we sort of tied to likes and thumbs up and even when we're texting, tap backs and things like that. So that's interesting. The reward system there.
I think it's the same thing if you and I know when we started doing this series, I turned off my notifications on my phone. They're all off. I don't get any dings, etc. It took me about a week or two while I was working not to want to pick up my phone. I think it was almost like the Pavlov dog thing. I was waiting for that little ding to go off so I could see, who was texting me, etc. So I think that there is something to it. It seems like, the data on it suggests it, but just testing it on myself, it seemed like there is this kind of idea that we like the likes, we like the ding that goes off. It kind of cues us in to pick up on these things.
Yeah, okay. Here's a funny thing on that. If anybody, I don't know if you can do this on an Android, but on an Apple phone, you can set your phone so that it ignores calls that are not in your contact list. And so I did that, and so I told my husband, "Oh, you should do that too, because if it's important, they'll leave a message, but it'll filter out all those spam calls." And he didn't want me to do that because he likes getting phone calls, which is kind of the same thing. Like it's
Yeah.
almost you choose to waste time. You choose to allow people to waste your time. So I thought that was very funny.
I set time limits on a lot of my social media I as well. So it'll cut me off. My iPhone allows me to do that. So you can set time limits as well. And it was hard at first. So, and I'm not a huge social media user. So I can't imagine, younger people that use it all the time. It might be a little bit hard to kind of disconnect. I'm not sure, but it was for me. On this particular slide, the hook that I talked about has obviously been studied beyond B.F. Skinner. And I may mispronounce his name, and I apologize. Yal, he's a behavioral engineer, and again, another good TED Talk. If you just type in his name in TED Talk, it'll come up. It's a 2015 TED Talk, and he says what we find, I'll read it on there because I want to get this quote in. It's really good. What we find is that habit forming products have what's called a hook designed into the product. If we feel lonely, we check Facebook. If we're uncertain, we Google. All of these things fundamentally cater to an emotional itch and emotional discomfort. What we want to do is find the pain points in users' lives so that we can solve that problem for them. He basically has helped design some of these things. So that's coming from someone who produces, designs, and works with this. And he said he references B.F. Skinner in that very variability key, and he says the reason that these social media sites do this again, and this is from him, are to create habits that keep us coming back to the platform. He said it can be good or bad, though. He wasn't all negative, and I kind of agree. An example was using like a language app like Duolingo or Busuu or anything else. If you want to learn a language, those cues may be really good to keep you on track. But they also can be bad. And there was a big study on Fortnite, which I know is an older thing, but I thought they had a great graphic on it of the trigger reward action investment. So you get this trigger, you can see the notifications. Why do you are triggered? You're bored, you're seeking a social connection, then you get that reward. You take some sort of action, and then you have an investment, so you keep coming back, and you can see the cycle happening, which was really interesting again. And I think that it's all about control and being aware of why you're going to this particular site. Are you going to learn? Have you set up, time limits for how you're going to proceed? I really think it's about just being aware and being in control of how much time, why you're using it, because they are going to play on your emotions to get you back.
Very interesting. Yeah, as a mother of a son who is obsessed with Fortnite, I'm going to be sharing this with him. So very interesting.
So again, why do we care? Our time and attention are finite. We only have so much time on this planet, and I think that that's something to take into account is where do you want to spend your time? This particular slide I'm going to go into, and a lot of you guys may have seen the Netflix film, The Social Dilemma, is taking a much more negative viewpoint. I do think they have some valid points, though, because Tristan Harris, who's a former Google ethicist and is part of the Center for Humane Technology, his quote that I pulled, it's not about giving you all this freedom, it's about sucking you in to take your time. That's kind of their big deal. And in the black box on the slide it was kind of one of their main pieces on the Center for Humane Technology. They say as long as social media companies profit from addiction, depression, and division, our society will be at risk. So they're saying this is a problem societally. And on their site, if you're interested, they do have tools about building, I guess, a more healthy relationship with your uh, tech and social media. The things that they have on their site that I also want to recommend is they have some short pieces. If you don't have Netflix, you can go in and watch clips of some of the main problems. They have the mental dilemma, the democracy dilemma, and the discrimination dilemma, which are three kind of big topics today. And they go in and give you kind of a summary of why they think those are problems. So I encourage you to look at those.
Very interesting. Yeah, the social dilemma was, I thought that was pretty eye-opening. So yeah, but so what? So what's the harm if we get our news from social media, and if we get our friends from social media, and if we get our dinner plans from social media? Is there a negative there?
Yeah, and again, I use the Center for Humane Technology. They have a lot of research on their site. They've been doing this for, again, this is a new area, but of all the places I've looked, this is one of the most thorough. So they had a list. I put part of the list on this slide, and if you go in, they'll give you more detail. But you can say, making sense of the world. There's misinformation, conspiracy theories, and fake news. Obviously, those are problems. With your attention and cognition, you can lose, memory and focus. So again, they're taking a really negative approach. But I thought was interesting too. There was a recent testimony up on Capitol Hill. I believe it was on the Senate side. It was just April 27th. So it was what was that last week? And the Senate hearing was called Algorithms and Amplification: How Social Media Platforms Design Choices Shape Our Discourse and Our Minds. That was the title of the Senate hearing, which was interesting. And so you had this big back and forth. Tristan Harris was there, and Chris Coons, who's a Democrat, said that Congress needs to basically put in place more structure and while still allowing companies to um, have freedom within our capitalistic society. And he said, as far as what's next, he says he's encouraged to see that these topics are uh, being discussed or of broad interest, but he believes there can be a bipartisan solution that makes everybody happy. He said he's also conscious of the fact that we don't want to needlessly constrain some of the most innovative, fast-growing businesses in the West, and striking a balance is going to require more work and conversation. Now, Tristan Harris on the other side was saying again that the business model is to addict, outrage, polarize, and disinformed. So he's on the opposite end, and he says while the companies skim money, the major harm off the top to do what they can. And we want to celebrate that companies are trying to fix some of these problems. There's a long, long way to go, and there's a public interest in this.
Very interesting. And something that people don't like to bring up a lot is you do have a personal responsibility to check things out and to see, not in my class is familiar. I use the term sheeple. Don't be a sheeple. Don't just follow the crowd. Find out, ask questions, see what's right, see what's wrong. And there are positive ways to use social media. I mean, for example, from after COVID, you can go to almost every major museum in the world and view their holdings online. Now, that's not, I mean, a lot of people are going to go, wow, that sounds incredibly boring. But you know what? Try it.
It's fun. I like it.
Interesting. Yeah, then Pinterest, and you can go and look. But yeah, where's the personal responsibility here?
Yeah, and I think again, personal responsibility on not only your time usage and being aware of your time, track it. It's really interesting to track how you use your social media. And again, I did it to myself getting ready for this because I wanted to see, is it a problem? I was shocked by how much I was using certain things on my phone or social media. And again, I don't think I'm a huge social media user, but I think not only that with time, but where you're going. Are you going to museums to learn, or are you going down the rabbit hole of negativity on a site? So,
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
and not only personal responsibility, but are the companies doing anything to fix this issue? And I pulled a YouTube example since it's one of the biggest platforms that everybody seems to be using. This is from the University of Berkeley. It's from May of 2020, and they found that basically they said is there a problem with conspiracy theories is what they were looking for. And they said yes, the conspiracy theories flourish on social media, and there has been pressure by Congress, and that this pressure by Congress has helped YouTube in particular change their algorithms somewhat. They said things do look better on YouTube, and that also back to the personal responsibility, it kind of depends on who you're looking at on YouTube, who are the people pushing these conspiracy theories. Um, one, are you, and the other one was interesting was, are you prone to look for conspiracy theories? If you are and you get stuck in that bubble, what was interesting is that YouTube will feed you lots of conspiracy theory and worse conspiracy theories the longer you were on it. So if you were on there looking at museums like art and travel and whatever, kind of non-negative, I guess I'm going to say things, the algorithms seem to be fixed, a little bit for those people who aren't going down those rabbit holes. But if you are, just beware, you're going to be fed lots of conspiracy.
Yeah, sort of like, you get what you ask for, right?
Yeah, definitely. So what tools can we use to evaluate websites, news, media? I just picked a few that I like. The first one is fantastic. It's Stanford Civic Online Reasoning site. They have a free course that you can do. If you have not heard of lateral reading as a college student, you should. So it's a tool that fact checkers use, professional fact checkers. They ask who's behind the information. They read vertically versus up and down the page. So before they even get into the content of the page, they look at who's putting out this content. Do they have an agenda? Things of that nature. And looking at the Stanford site, there is some data that was interesting. They say digital natives, when they tested people, are easily duped if not taught how to properly evaluate information. And so I'm going to give you some examples. In a study they did, 82% of middle school students mistook advertisements for news. High school students that looked at an anonymous picture posted on a photo sharing site took it as evidence of an ecological effect of a nuclear disaster, and college students rated a splinter group of pediatricians labeled as a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center as more reliable than the 64,000 member American Academy of Pediatrics. So if you go on that site, they'll tell you how to avoid that.
That
And
is so interesting. There's a Instagram site called the Babylon Bee, and it's a satire. It's completely satire, and that brings up they've gotten in trouble a lot of times because they'll put something on and people will think that it's real, and it's really outrageous, but
yeah.
it's there. Okay, we did have a question. Could you define lateral reading really quick?
Yeah, lateral reading is reading across websites. So you'll leave the website you're on to check other sources online. So you're going to check 3 to 4. And it's the same thing I recommend in my class with news watching, not just watching one news channel, but multiple of different ideologies, both domestic and foreign. It's the same thing that'll happen. If that makes sense, with lateral reading. So if you go on their site, they have some quick videos. They also partnered with a Crash Course, which a lot of people are probably familiar with, and they have a Crash Course video. The other one I want to mention that was on that site was Spot the Troll. If you want a gamified format of trying to test yourself, the Clemson University Spot the Troll is a great one. And if you want to fun, the Meme Policeman site is fun to look at memes and why they're bad. Some of the ones that are on their site.
Right. Thank you very much. So, what do you conclude? Does social media make you dumb, make you stupid?
Well, Angie, of course not. It doesn't mean you're stupid if you have a social media account, and social media does not turn you from a smart person into a stupid person. It might do something worse, though. And so we're going to talk about whether social media makes you smart or stupid. It's really up to you, and how you use it. So it does, a heavy diet of social media does make you likely to be less well informed. So you read things, but not necessarily good information. It does make you spend your time in a way that doesn't enrich your life. So if you spend your time reading Facebook versus reading a couple of news updates, then you are less informed and you are less intelligent about what's going on in the world than you could otherwise be. It does make you potentially distracted, and not just distracted by social media, but when you're not using your phone or your electronics, you are distracted by the thought of what you might be missing. So it's kind of a perpetual distraction. Of course, it does make you subject to targeted ads. And targeted ads are very, very targeted. As we know, the algorithms are extremely advanced, and they can look for something as specific as a person between 18 and 22 who lives in Tarrant County, who's interested in dogs. Like, it can be very, very targeted, and that makes it more and more enticing to you because it seems specific to your interests. And of course, we are all powerless to the algorithms. Algorithms can't really be explained. So just like with YouTube recommending what to watch next, or Facebook deciding what comes up in your feed, or Instagram deciding what pictures to show you and what pictures to not really show you, the algorithm kind of is designed to make social media addictive and enticing. And so we end up spending more time on it, which ends up putting us back in this loop where we're less well informed and we're spending more time reading social media than other things. So in and of itself, it doesn't make you stupid. If you have Instagram on your phone, that doesn't mean you're dumber than a person who doesn't. But a heavy use of social media can be pretty bad for you in terms of critical thinking. So I read a study that I want to just kind of explain a little bit. So they were trying to decide if people who were heavily connected in social media were smarter or not. And so they were asking them questions, and they were letting them use this social network for the site. And they did find that the more well-connected people had more right answers, which on the surface looks like, okay, then people are using social media to spread information and share information, and it might make us smarter. But really, they were just kind of copying other people. And if you copy, then you're not thinking critically, which means that you're not actually thinking and you are potentially becoming dumber. So while we may get some great talking points if we read things on Twitter and if we're really selective about who we follow, we might get some good information. If all we're doing is repeating the things that we read and see, then we're not actually smarter. We might appear to be, but we're not actually. And if we don't do any actual thinking, we're not coming up with insights, then we're wasting our analytic parts of our brains and perhaps becoming a little bit dumber. I don't like to really use the word dumb, but perhaps becoming a little less sharp. Let's say that.
You know, a good analogy, and you're an English professor, so you are going to really like this analogy, but it's kind of like when you talk to, and I'm doing this for students, when students, you talk to them in the classroom and you sort of get to know them, and then all of a sudden they turn in this, this term paper that is absolutely brilliant, and you know they didn't come up with that themselves, right? Because you already know the student. And that it's sort of, that sounds sort of like what we're doing with social media is instead of me coming up with my own ideas, I'm sort of regurgitating other people's ideas and passing them off as my own, which is not allowing me to really even come up with my ideas. Is that fair?
It is. And it's important to remember that this is really about skill and not knowledge. So remembering a bunch of facts makes you super good at Jeopardy, and all the power to people who are good at Jeopardy. But that's not really intelligence. Intelligence is the skill of using information, of finding information, of making connections, of putting things together, of figuring things out. It's a skill. And so if you consume a lot of information, false, not false, but you don't develop the skill of figuring out what's valid, what's accurate, what's important, then you're not getting any smarter, regardless of what you're reading. And so, you can copy lots of things and put them together, but that doesn't mean you truly understand the subject matter, for sure. And social media doesn't necessarily make you smarter. There are some uses by some folks that might be beneficial. And I'm hoping that I fall into this category. I don't use Facebook or Instagram very much anymore, thanks to doing this semester. I do still use Twitter. I don't think you're gonna have to pry that one from my cold dead hands, but it a lot of it depends on who you follow and what you do with the information. So as opposed to heavy Facebook users, people who are regular Twitter users were found to be better informed on current affairs, just because of the way the systems work, the kinds of things that get posted, and because on Facebook you're mostly following your friends, and on Twitter you're mostly following a mix of both people you know and people you don't know. And students who who learn how to use social media critically and responsibly may actually intellectually benefit from using it because they're practicing those skills of reading it, questioning it, thinking about it, looking for information in other places, and trying to figure out who is more reliable. So that might make you smarter, but again, is that what most people do with social media? No, most of them are scrolling, right? To pass the time, or are checking out what other people are doing. So it depends, again, on how you use it. And so if you are trying to balance using social media with not becoming any dumber, or if you want to make sure you stay as sharp as you are, then remember it's about skills and not about knowledge. So I can read 1,000 posts by flat earthers and I'm never going to be convinced the earth is flat, right? So if I'm not susceptible to it, then it's okay to look at it and to think about it and to critically analyze it. But what you really have to do is think and consider. Anytime I read something that gives me a strong reaction of any kind, I'm going to look it up and see if it's true. So if I'm excited by it, if I'm scared by it, if I'm angered by it, if I'm outraged by it, if it's the most hilarious thing I've ever seen, I'm going to look it up and see, can I find this on other sources? Are there other people who are posting about this? And again, what is the context, right? So look for consensus among experts, and it can be hard for us if we're not experts in a field to realize who the experts are. But if we have consensus among experts, then that is who we should trust. A lot of times what ends up happening on social media is you have a person who posts an individual experience, and people tend to follow that as opposed to research by experts. And so if one person got bit by a pigeon and has this horrible experience and all these awful things happened, does that mean that we should ban all pigeons? Let's ask, experts about it. I'm trying to think of non-controversial examples because I have a lot of controversial ones that right on the top of my head. But if one bad experience doesn't mean something is bad for everyone. So we want to ask experts. We want to rely on research. We want to go beyond single independent experiences that get amplified. Limit your time on social media. Again, look up information in other places as well. Very important to protect your privacy and your information so that you don't become the commodity, and put things in context. A lot of things that we see on social media that are outrageous, that like really give us a sense of outrage, are things that are old or taken out of context, or photos that aren't showing what they appear to be showing. So we just have to put all of those things in context. And again, anything that gives you a sense of rage, then anything that seems like an ad, anything that doesn't have a date, anything with just really strong emotional language, those are things that you really need to independently verify from somewhere else, because those are big red flags for me. If I have a strong reaction in any direction, I know I want to check this out before I do anything else. One good thing about Twitter actually now is if you are looking at a news article or a link to something, if you try to retweet it without actually opening it, Twitter will say, do you want to read this before you share it? Now, it doesn't prevent you from sharing something you haven't read, but that does help limit the number of people who repost things just because they have crazy headlines. Some other things that social media can tend to do is kind of pit people against each other. So even people who mostly agree on things sometimes end up disagreeing on basic facts about news events, because it's just grouping us into smaller and smaller tribes and trying to get us to have an us versus them mindset, because the more conflict there is on social media, the more eyeballs they get. And again, this idea that if somebody disagrees with you, then they're wrong or they can't be trusted, is perpetuated by bots on Twitter, by just general idiots who want to start stuff on Twitter, and by just the social dynamics of social media. So we have to look for what we have in common as opposed to things that we disagree on. And we have to realize that it's okay if we disagree on certain things. That doesn't mean that another person can't be trusted about anything. So it's really about looking for those kind of gray areas as opposed to seeing everything in black and white. And here are some examples of things from social media that are crazy to me, that are just more evidence that lies can take off pretty quickly and get pretty far. And so we have to be very, very careful about what we're reading and what we're believing before we share misinformation. So the first is someone faked a screenshot of a tweet from the Chicago police, and in 12 hours, that fake tweet got 38,000 retweets and 175,000 likes. That's a lot of eyeballs in 12 hours. And if you think even now there are people who saw the fake tweet and don't realize that it was fake, even though this happened a few weeks ago. We also have people who just give us really bad takes on everything from history to government to grammar to health to COVID-19, to So we have to be very, very careful. This one I got from, I think it's from Bad Legal Takes, which is one of my favorite Twitter accounts. Good thing the courts have already decided that invoking your Fifth Amendment rights can be taken as an admission of guilt, which of course is not true at all and is like the antithesis of what the intention in the Constitution was. But this person got a lot of likes and retweets until the Bad Legal Takes Twitter account found it and tried to debunk it. Due to extreme, this is a tattoo artist on Instagram. Due to extreme health risks, I will no longer be scheduling appointments with anyone who's been vaccinated. That is definitely trying to spread some misinformation. And it also seems like a person who has been misinformed, probably by social media, spreading misinformation. And the last one is actually a photo that I found on Twitter this morning, but this person is my neighbor. This truck is in my neighborhood. So, but I found this on the internet. So you see that this person has very strong opinions on space travel. He's also a flat earther and anti-vaxxer. So he has crazy opinions, but this picture is picked up and shared somewhat mockingly, but also a lot of people support this viewpoint as well. So these images get circulated and these tweets get retweeted, and as someone has mentioned in the chat, those fake things spread pretty quickly because they give us those strong reactions. We get really mad, or we get really excited, or we agree completely, or we can't believe it. And so those are the things that we respond to. But if it's that crazy, it's something we want to verify before we share it. So we want to make sure that we fact check everything. This is a list of resources that you've already seen before in a previous webinar that we've done, and we can certainly provide these links to you. There's lots of places where you can check your facts, and lots of people and institutions and organizations that are dedicated to helping people discern truth from disinformation. And you know, this idea that there's two sides to every story is also kind of pernicious, because of course there aren't two sides to the truth, right? Some things happen and some things didn't happen. Some things are true and some things aren't true. So not everything is up for debate. Not everything is based on our opinion. So we want to look for actual facts first, and then we want to draw our own conclusions about those facts. But if we start with false facts, then we're already on the wrong road. And what's really important is to, again, remember, this isn't about information. It's about your skills and how you discern. Learn to Discern is the name of our webinar series. How you discern truth from misinformation, and learning how to use the resources available to you to, again, just check information and to look at what other people are saying, and to not be persuaded by a person who you happen to agree with or who just looks super reliable. So these are Kim's. I'll let Kim talk about these.
I put these in because as doing this whole series, again, I told you guys earlier, I kind of used myself as a test subject on a lot of this. And one thing that I found, and I wanted to put this up just for fun and kind of as a, ending to this, is that being studying how I use my time and how these things have drawn me in has been really interesting and I think useful to me. So a couple of books that I read that were really helpful on habit formation, and especially The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. I think that's one's recommended a lot. He goes into the psychology of how things are marketed to you, which was eye-opening. Atomic Habits, if you want to change your habits, is extremely helpful. I'm halfway through my Yale course on the science of well-being. It's fantastic. It teaches you skills on how to utilize your time better. If you're looking at social media as a time vacuum and you want to kind of get out of that and use your time more usefully, it was kind of that idea. I was talking with my son about how, if you say you don't have time to study, you don't have time to do X, Y, Z, fill it in. How can you take that time back? That Science of Wellbeing courses is nice for that, as well as there's a a podcast attached to it. I think it's the Happiness Lab, I think is what it is, but it's the same instructor does it. And then the 10% Happier podcast with Dan Harris. He interviews a ton of experts in the field. He's a little more on the mindfulness side of things, but again, a fun kind of way to think about how you use your time and how you're investing in yourself and your critical thinking and how you're looking at the world. So just kind of some fun things.
If you can bring yourself to spend time listening to a podcast that is not about murder, sorry, that's just like most podcasts I listen to.
True.
Dan Harris is a great source and a very interesting person. And I can't recommend anything Dan Harris does highly enough, honestly. So I'm just going.
I'm gonna put in a plug for you guys real quick. Misty and Allegra do a podcast, and I just listened to it the other day. By the way, you guys are awesome. If y'all want to plug that, Professor Hers. It's interesting.
It's true. We are awesome.
I'm totally serious. For students. You learn a lot and it's fun. And anyway, so just putting in a plug for it's Professor Hers, right? Yeah.
Yes. All right. So these are our sources, and we can put these links in the chat as well. Hopefully they don't end up being gigantic. I don't understand why Teams does that, but I just really kind of want you to know that this is all information that we looked up. It's not just things that we pulled from our brain. And it's important, of course, thank you, whoever just posted those in the chat. It's important that you, investigate these things further. It's not that you shouldn't trust us, because you can trust your professors, but if there are topics that you want to know more about or things that you think you want to look up yourself, independently verifying the things that you hear is an important skill and something that you should get into the habit of. And also this Verge guide to fighting misinformation is a very helpful, it's an interactive news article. So there are things you can click and like get more information, and there are drop-down menus. It's very, very interesting. And I think very in line with what we've been discussing today. So I would recommend that Verge guide probably as the most interesting source here.
Very good. So final words on this. I mean, I would guess that we would suggest that all of our students, when you choose who to follow on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, think about following people who have views different than your own. That way you can see different sides to everything. And like Allegra mentioned, fact check everything. Don't just take things at face value, no matter who's telling you what. Go and look it up yourself. So you need to sort of be your own filter. So what else would you guys like to finish with before we talk about next semester?
It's really important to me that everyone knows that our goal is not to shame you for using Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. And our goal is not to tell you what to do with your life. I don't want anyone to think that that's our position. I know that we have pretty strong opinions based on the research and science, which is continuing to emerge because social media, of course, is only about 15 years old. But we also want you to be very thoughtful about how you're using not just your time, but your energy. And before you spread information or get worked up about something, to just look it up in other places. And again, to practice those skills of discerning not only what's true, but also what's important, like what matters, what's valuable. And so those are skills that we're all continuing to build. None of us are perfect at it. I will say that Misty has posted the link in the chat, which is probably what's most compelling for our students, because they are thoughtful consumers of their own time, and they're here not just to learn, but also to get credit for attending. So that link has been posted in the chat. And if you're watching the recording of this on YouTube, the link will be right under the video in the comments for the next couple of days. And on that link for credit, you'll have an opportunity to give us feedback. We read that feedback, we take it very serious, and we're planning next year's webinars. We'll have 2 topics, one in fall and one in spring. Obviously this semester it was social media, but we can cover different subjects in and next year. So let us know what your ideas are, what kinds of things you would like for us to discuss, or what things you might be think are cool or interesting, and make sure that you fill that link out and do whatever process your instructor has asked you to do to get credit for attending.
Perfect. Well, thank you to both of our professors for presenting, Professor Davis and Professor Cox. We appreciate your time, and we appreciate the time of everyone who is attending. If you have any questions, you can still put them in the link, or send the questions to your instructors. So thank you very much.